Right, so that's now recording, Angela.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It has been a long time since we've been able to travel anywhere. And no doubt there are many members like us hoping that we will soon be able to fly to the UK to see family and friends once again. That time will come, but for today, we have to be armchair travellers, and we're going to follow in the footsteps of a tourist from ancient Greece. How do we really know that the 7 wonders of the ancient world really existed? Well, there's still one in existence, and I'm sure many of you have been to the Great Pyramid of Giza. We also have a lot of documentary evidence from people like Diodorus and Herodotus, Greek historians, Philo of Byzantium, who was a Greek engineer, a physicist, and a writer. And of course, we have a lot of archaeological evidence. I'm sure many of you have been around the world and seen these sort of sites during our holidays. Originally, they were not called wonders at all, but themata. In other words, things to be seen. Later on, the word thaumaata was used, meaning wonder. And why were there 7? Well, the Greeks believed it held spiritual significance and represented perfection. It was the number of the 5 known planets at the time, plus the sun and the moon. All 7 existed at the same time for a period of less than 60 years. And the Great Pyramid of Giza, as I've said, is the only one still in existence, and of course, by far the oldest. Alexander the Great's conquests enabled Greek travelers to explore the lands of other civilizations, such as the Egyptians, the Persians, and Babylonians. The travelers compiled what we may call early guidebooks of the most remarkable things to see, and they were meant as recommendations for future travelers or tourists. And this is why the 7 wonders are all around the Mediterranean rim. Although the lands conquered by Alexander the Great dissolved into separate kingdoms following his death, they were still ruled by Greek-speaking dynasties. Travel was not yet as safe as it will become under the Roman Empire, but the network of Greek culture extended far and wide, offering an open invitation to explore. And there was also a shift in Western attitudes as thinkers began to celebrate man-made creations along with those of the gods, and the Greeks marveled at their own achievements. A scholar tourist of 250 BC would set off on his grand tour with a couple of servants and a pair of pack mules to carry the luggage. And as you can see, there would have been papyrus guidebooks for him to consult before departing. The first part of the journey would take him from Athens across to Olympia, a distance of 338 kilometers. And along the roadside, there would be inns and cheap roadside eating houses. There would be vendors to haggle over for souvenirs. A cheap glass vial engraved with an image of the Pharos of Alexandria has been found by archaeologists as far away as Afghanistan. There are also professional tour guides who would jostle for commissions. And we know that one 1st century BC antiquarian was worn down by the harangues, and he wrote, "Zeus, protect me from your guides at Olympia." The Olympic Games began in Greece in 776 BC in honor of Zeus, and they were held every 4 years in Peloponnesus. The purpose was to help to unify the Greek city-states. A sacred truce was declared and safe passage given to all traveling to the site, and the site was called Olympia just for the season of the Games. At its height in the 5th century BC, the Olympic Games drew crowds of over 40,000 from all across the Greek world: Athens, Sparta, Syracuse, Rhodes, and 100 other cities. The temple was constructed by the architect Libon between 472 and 456 BC. The competitions were held in a stadium near the temple. You can see the stadium here behind the temple. The Greek sculptor Phidias was commissioned to create the statue of Zeus. In his left hand, Zeus carried a scepter made of multicolored alloy of rare metals. It was crowned with an eagle. It symbolized his rule over the earth. His right hand held a crowned statue of Nike, the goddess of victory, and the stool beneath his feet was upheld by 2 gold lions. A very detailed description was recorded by the traveller Pausanias, who wrote his own personal account of his travels throughout Greece in mid-2nd century AD. And he told us that the sculpture was wreathed with shoots of olive, worked in gold, and seated on a magnificent throne of cedar wood, inlaid with ivory, gold, ebony, and precious stones. So what happened to the statue of Zeus? Well, in AD 313, the Roman Emperor Constantine made Christianity legal. And in 380, Christianity was made the official religion of Rome. AD 391, the Roman Emperor Theodosius banned participation in pagan cults. The games were abolished and the temples closed. The statue was taken to Constantinople, where it was destroyed in the Great Fire of the Palace of Lausus in AD 475. In 1954, German archaeologists discovered the workshop of Phidias beneath an early Christian church. And a cup was found inscribed with the words, and here it is on the bottom in Greek, "I belong to Phidias." Now, this is what you see today, the Temple of Zeus in ruins. And in the background there, you can see what would have been the stadium. But during the 2004 Summer Olympics, the stadium was restored and it hosted the shot put events. Coins have been found from the period, and as you can see, there is a statue, the seated Zeus. And it gave inspiration to the Lincoln Memorial. From Olympia, he would have caught a merchant ship and he would sail some 300 miles eastwards across the waters of the Aegean, having negotiated a price with the ship's captain and taking a place on deck. The ship would arrive a few days later at the bustling island of Rhodes, where he would have been amazed by the huge colossus of Rhodes, over 30 meters high, making it one of the tallest statues of the ancient world. The statue represented the sun god Helios, who was also the patron god of Rhodes. After Alexander the Great's death, his empire fell largely to 3 protagonists: Ptolemy, Antigonus, and Seleucus. The Rhodians supported Ptolemy, which angered Antigonus, and in 305 BC, he sent his son Demetrius to capture and punish the city of Rhodes. Demetrius, however, was defeated, abandoning all his siege machinery and many weapons on Rhodes. The Rhodians expressed their pride by building a triumphal statue of their patron god Helios, and much of the iron and bronze was reforged from the various weapons Demetrius's army left behind. According to the Book of Philon of Byzantium, 15 tons of bronze were used and 9 tons of iron. And inside the statue, there were several stone columns which acted as the main support. I'm sure many of you have read Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where he says, Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonourable graves. The medieval perception was that ships would enter the harbour between the legs of the statue, but modern historians argue that would have been impossible, and the Colossus would have stood on a breakwater on the side of the harbour. The statue stood for only 56 years until the 226 BC earthquake, when it snapped at the knees and fell onto the land. Ptolemy III offered to pay for its reconstruction, but the Rhodians declined, since the oracle at Delphi suggested that its destruction meant they had angered Helios by building it in the first place. Strabo, an ancient Greek geographer, described in his book Geographica that the remains lay on the ground for over 800 years, and even broken, they were so impressive that people travelled from far and wide to come to see them. Pliny the Elder, a Roman author, naturalist, philosopher, and naval and army commander of the early Roman Empire, he remarked that few people could wrap their arms around the fallen thumb, and that each of its fingers was larger than most statues. In 693 AD, a Muslim caliph stormed Rhodes and captured the island. And according to the Chronicle of Theophanes, the statue was melted down and sold to a Jewish merchant who loaded it onto 900 camels and took it away. In 2008, another theory was published by Ursula Vedder, suggesting that the Colossus was never in the port at all, but was part of the Acropolis of Rhodes, on a hill which overlooks the port. The enormous stone foundations at the Apollo temple site were the supporting platform for the Colossus. In that same year, 2008, The Guardian reported that a modern Colossus was to be built at the harbour entrance by a German artist, Gert Hoff. It was to be a giant light sculpture constructed partly from melted down weapons from around the world, intended to be as a monument to peace. One that would stand between 60 and 100 meters high so that people could physically enter it, and it would cost up to 200 million euros. But Gert Hoff, unfortunately, died from cancer at the age of 60 in January 2012. But in 2015, a group of European architects announced plans to build a modern Colossus bestriding two piers at the harbour entrance. The statue would include a cultural centre, a library, an exhibition hall, and a lighthouse, all powered by solar panels. As of October 2018, no such plans have been carried out, and the website for the project has in fact been taken offline. But I'd just like to show you a few images of what this group of Europeans envisaged. Well, probably totally impractical, hugely expensive. And so it's something that would have been a great tourist attraction, yes, but I don't think we're going to be seeing it in our day and age. The statue inspired this painting by Salvador Dali, and it gave its name to the Colosseum in Rome. And those of you who've been to the Statue of Liberty will probably know that inside the pedestal, there is this inscription, not like the brazen giant of Greek fame, with conquering limbs astride from land to land. Here at our sea-washed sunset gates shall stand a mighty woman with a torch, whose flame is the imprisoned lightning, and her name, Mother of Exiles. Our tourist would again buy his passage on a merchant ship, and this time he will be sailing up the coast from Rhodes to Ephesus. He would no doubt be amazed at the opulence of Asia Minor, now modern-day Turkey, where the Temple of Artemis in the ostentatious port of Ephesus mixed Oriental splendor and Hellenic artistry. The temple was an important attraction, visited by merchants, kings, and sightseers, many of whom paid homage to Artemis in the form of jewelry and various goods. And our traveller would no doubt have brought her a gift too. She protects fertility, symbolized by the spherical objects that cover the lower part of her chest. The common assumption is that they are female breasts, but this is now claimed to be incorrect, and they probably represent the testicles of a bull. In 356 BC, the temple was destroyed in a vainglorious act of arson by Herostratus. He set fire to the wooden roof beams, seeking fame at any cost, thus the term herostratic fame. He was promptly executed, and the Ephesian authorities forbade any mention of him in word or writing on pain of death. However, the Greek historian Theopompus recorded the arsonist's name and deeds in his book Hellenics, thus granting Herostratus the very fame that he craved. And the term herostratic fame, or fame at any cost, has passed into modern languages and been used to describe the deeds of such contemporary psychopaths as John Lennon's murderer, Mark Chapman, who said, "I felt that by killing John Lennon, I would become somebody." In Greek and Roman historical tradition, the temple's destruction coincided with the birth of Alexander the Great, and he later offered to pay for the temple's rebuilding. The Ephesians tactfully refused, saying it would be improper for one god to build a temple to another, and they eventually rebuilt it after his death at their own expense. Work started in 323 BC and continued for many years. In 268 AD, the Goths laid waste to many cities and set fire to the temple. And as I've mentioned, the Roman Emperor Theodosius banned participation in pagan cults, and temples were then closed. 10 years later, Christians led by John Chrysostom tore down the remains of the temple, and the stones were used in the construction of other buildings. During the next 2 centuries, Ephesians converted to Christianity, and the cult of Artemis lost its sacred appeal. 1869, the site of the temple was rediscovered by John Turtle Wood in an expedition sponsored by the British Museum. And these are some of the artifacts that are now found in the museum. But there are also some of, this one, for example, the statue of Artemis in the Ephesus Archaeological Museum. And you may well know that there's a miniature park being constructed in Istanbul, where you'll find the scale model of the Temple of Artemis. The next stage of the journey was from Ephesus to Halicarnassus. You can see Halicarnassus down here, Ephesus and Halicarnassus. The city of Halicarnassus was the capital of a small kingdom called Caria along the Mediterranean coast of Asia Minor. The top of the mausoleum formed a 24-step pyramid surmounted by a 4-horse marble chariot. The outside was decorated with statues of people, lions, horses, and other animals. Mausolus and Artemisia, who was also his sister, ruled over Halicarnassus and the surrounding territory for 24 years. Mausolus died in 353 BC, but it is likely that he started to plan the tomb before his death. Artemisia ruled alone after his death and continued the building project, but she died herself 2 years later before its completion. The works were then carried on by their children. It became so famous that Mausolus' name is now associated with all stately tombs throughout our modern world, mausoleum. Halicarnassus fell to Alexander the Great, who sacked the city, but the mausoleum survived. It also survived attacks by pirates in 620, 62 BC and 58 BC. The mausoleum had stood above the city for some 17 centuries. Then a series of earthquakes shattered the columns and sent the stone chariot crashing to the ground. Crusaders who had occupied the city from the 13th century onward recycled the broken stone into their own buildings, and by 1404 AD, only the very base of the mausoleum was still recognizable. Early in the 15th century, the Knights of St. John of Malta built a massive Crusader castle, and when it was fortified in 1494, they used the stones of the mausoleum. 1522, there were rumours of a Turkish invasion, which caused the knights to strengthen the castle further, and much of the remaining stone was used within the castle walls. And one of the knights, named Latour, described the plundering of the tomb in his memoirs. First, we found the stairs leading down to the burial chamber below the ground, and we were breathless at the spectacular sight in front of our eyes. The second minute, we started looting the place, but we didn't have much time. They commanded us back to the castle. The next day, when we came back to the same site, precious gold, jewellery, and pieces of fine cloth were scattered around the place. In 1846, the British Museum sent the archaeologist Charles Newton to search for more remains of the mausoleum. There were 24 lions, and some may be found in the British Museum and others in the Archaeological Museum in Istanbul. And this is a frieze of the Battle of the Greeks and the Amazons, which was found in the Bodrum Castle, now in the British Museum. And this is a mosaic from the mausoleum at Halicarnassus. And these are the ruins as they can be seen today. And again, there is a scale model of the mausoleum at the Miniature Park in Istanbul. The design of the shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne was inspired by that of the mausoleum, and the Masonic House of the Temple of the Scottish Rite in Washington. Our intrepid traveller will now sail south to Alexandria, a journey of several days. On entering the harbour, he would immediately have seen the Great Lighthouse. Pharos became the origin of the word lighthouse in Greek and many Romance languages, for example, the Spanish faro. As mentioned previously, Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, and the city of Alexander was completed by Ptolemy, the new ruler of Egypt. He founded the Ptolemaic kingdom in 305 BC. The construction cost was said to have been 800 talents, an amount equal today to about $3 million. It was made of stone faced with white marble blocks with lead mortar. A lantern stood on the top with a giant bonfire whose light may have been focused by mirrors, perhaps made of polished bronze, into a beam visible 35 miles out to sea. Guide ships were necessary to enter Alexandria's harbour because of the treacherous sandbars, and it was said that 300 slaves worked on the Pharos. And coins produced at the time bore the likeness of the Pharos upon them. And other evidence exists, such as this mosaic, which was found in Libya. It stood for over 1,500 years, surviving a tsunami that hit Eastern Mediterranean in 365 AD with minor damage. In 956 AD, tremors might have been responsible for cracks that appeared in the structure at the end of the 10th century. Restoration lowered the height of the building by about 70 feet, but the 1303 and 1323 earthquakes caused extensive damage. So you can see it's been largely by earth tremors and earthquakes. And then in 1365, Alexandria was under attack by the Cypriot king. And 1375, Egyptian records indicate that the final collapse occurred. In 1480, the remaining ruins disappeared when the Sultan of Egypt, Qaitbay, built a medieval fort on the former location of the building, using some of the fallen stone. 1961, an Egyptian diver fisherman discovered stone ruins lying in the water below Fort Qaitbay, and the Egyptian Navy recovered a statue made of Aswan granite dating from the Hellenistic period. 1994, French archaeological divers discovered remains of the lighthouse on the floor of Alexandria's eastern harbour. And the area is now an underwater archaeological park. Tourists with diving gear can swim about the remains of the Great Pharos Lighthouse. The Qaitbay Citadel was restored in 1984. And you can see a model of the Pharos Lighthouse in the Maritime Museum at Alexandria, and it was based on a very comprehensive study in 2006. The Pharos of Abusir, an ancient funerary monument thought to be modelled after the Pharos at Alexandria, with which it is approximately contemporaneous. And as of 2009, it is also suspected to be the burial place of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. A replica was constructed in 2005 at the Window of the World Cultural Park in China, and it gave inspiration to this painting by Salvador Dali. Our traveller and his servants would now set sail once more for the journey from Alexandria to Giza. They would have sailed on a small vessel up the Nile to the pyramids of Giza. And then they would have been especially dazzling in the Greek era when they were still sheathed in white limestone, glistening brilliantly in the desert sun. The Giza pyramids were erected on a plateau on the west bank of the Nile and were connected by covered causeways to mortuary temples in the valley below the plateau. These temples had landing stages which were linked to the Nile by a canal. Shaven-headed priests acting as tour guides pretended to translate the pyramid's hieroglyphics. Herodotus was told by his Egyptian guides that it took 20 years for a force of 100,000 oppressed slaves to build the pyramid, and stones were lifted into position by the use of immense machines. Egyptologists believe that the pyramid was built as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu over a 20-year period, and at 146.5 meters, it was equivalent to a modern 48-story building and was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Until the construction of Lincoln Cathedral in 1311, which stood at 160 meters tall. In AD 1300, a massive earthquake loosened many of the outer casing stones, which were then carted away by Sultan al-Nasir to build mosques and fortresses in nearby Cairo. The stones can still be seen as parts of these structures. There are various passages inside, and I'm sure some of you have actually been there. The entrance, descending passage, another ascending passage, a grand gallery, an antechamber, and the king's burial chamber. And this is what the burial chamber looks like today. And as I said, I'm sure that some of you have actually been inside this chamber, but it's not for the claustrophobic. And we are unlikely to ever see a photograph like this again. Not surprisingly, much has been written about the Giza Pyramid, especially in relation to various forms of sci-fi. I'm just going to share one theory put forward as to the Giza Pyramid being a gigantic power plant. The diagram shows it's quite technical, so I'm going to play you just a very short video clip, which will give you an idea as to how it was supposed to have worked.
Ever since scientists have been studying the Great Pyramids there at Giza, there has been speculation that they may have been energy generators, some kind of power plants. And of course, the mainstream Egyptologists are saying, oh, these are just simple tombs for pharaohs.
But the Great Pyramid has the precision of a machine, and so when you consider it as a machine, you see that there are certain functions that each part of the pyramid performs. The subterranean chamber is evidence itself, and it has been demonstrated by an engineer by the name of John Cadman, who created a model of the subterranean chamber, and by feeding water in it, the chamber itself seems to cause some very unusual reactions in the pyramid.
The water would rush down the shaft of the Great Pyramid down to the subterranean chamber, which was about 330 feet. It would bypass a valve, and then the valve would slam shut, and it would cause a shock wave to be sent up the Great Pyramid itself, and then it would shoot towards the ceiling that was directly below the King's Chamber. It's a freestanding granite tuned room, and it would cause that to resonate at a specific frequency.
The granite is the same material that you would use in a microphone or a telephone. It vibrates through the introduction of sound, and it emits electrons. Well, you take that phenomenon and you control it inside the Great Pyramid, then you have a machine that can vibrate that granite as much as an earthquake would vibrate granite in the earth and create electromagnetic energy.
Christopher Dunn's theories indicates that the Great Pyramid was sending microwave signal to a satellite. And in fact, studies of his working devices have shown that this probably would work. We could have been sending messages into space. It's very similar to the SETI program that's sending out messages right now, trying to attract the extraterrestrials to contact us. Christopher Dunn's theory will change forever the way we look at the ancient Egyptians, their civilization, and where they came from and where they got their knowledge and technology.
Well, I'm neither a sci-fi fan nor an engineer, but personally to me it all seems a bit fanciful, but I'll leave that to the rest of you to debate. But it just seems a bit out of this world to me. Now, I've just included this only in the last few days. I don't know whether any of you saw this, but on Saturday, 3rd of April, the Egyptian mummies were paraded through Cairo and they were transported in chronological order of their reigns. It was only a very short clip on the TV and there seemed to be little announcement about it beforehand. And it was quite a major spectacle. So I'm just going to show you a short video clip. And of course, if you want to see it in more detail, it is on YouTube. It was a very lavish spectacle, as you can see, multi-million dollars, and it saw 22 mummies, 18 kings and 4 queens transported from the peach-coloured neoclassical Egyptian Museum to their new resting place 5 kilometres away, the new National Museum of Egyptian Civilization, in what was called the Pharaoh's Golden Parade. So we're now on the final stage of our traveller's journey, and our traveller and his servants will most probably return by boat to Alexandria and pay passage on another ship destined for Antioch. This would be followed by a journey of 500 miles on desert tracks, either on horseback or in a camel train, or possibly by carriage to Babylon. Is Babylon simply a legend, or did it really exist? Well, the Greek historian Herodotus wrote in 450 BC, in addition to its size, Babylon surpasses in splendor any city in the known world. But he did not mention the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Inside the city walls were fortresses and temples containing immense statues of solid gold. Rising above the city was the famous Tower of Babel, a temple to the god Marduk. The building, which is said to have stood 91.5 meters tall, was eventually destroyed by Alexander the Great. It has largely been thought of as a myth, but there is now a suggestion that the remains at Borsippa could be the origin of the Tower of Babel. This is the Ishtar Gate, built around 575 BC by King Nebuchadnezzar II and dedicated to the goddess Ishtar. The earliest lists of the wonders, describing the 7 wonders of the ancient world, had the Ishtar Gate as the 7th instead of the lighthouse of Alexandria. The foundations of the gate were discovered between 1899 and 1914, and parts of the gate and lions are in various museums around the world. The gateway has been reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin from the glazed bricks that were found. And the Babylonian Ishtar was a template for American Statue of Liberty. Babylonian scriptures called her the light of the world. But did the Hanging Gardens of Babylon really exist? And what may they have looked like? Well, the gardens were supposedly built by King Nebuchadnezzar II around 600 BC to please his homesick wife, Ametis of Media. She came from a mountainous region, so the tiers of the garden were meant to remind her of her home. Nebuchadnezzar recorded his many accomplishments in cuneiform, a type of ancient writing used in record keeping, but again, he didn't mention the gardens. This has led some scholars to theorize that the gardens were built by the Assyrian queen, Semiramis, during her 5-year reign starting in 810 BC. Or even perhaps by Sennacherib, the ruler of Nineveh. Various ancient Greek historians wrote that the location may have been confused with gardens that did exist at Nineveh, since tablets from there clearly show gardens. To get the water up to the top layers would have required something like the operation of Archimedes' screw. As it's turned around, the water is gradually drawn up. Or perhaps even something like a chain pump, continuously rolling round to bring the water up in the buckets. The Hanging Gardens are said to have survived more than 500 years until they were destroyed by an earthquake in the 1st century BC. In 1899, the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey excavated the Babel site for 14 years, and he discovered a basement with 14 large rooms with stone arched ceilings. Koldewey continued exploring the area, and he discovered many of the features which have been reported by the historian Diodorus. And this 1950 photograph is said to capture the supposed site of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. In 1971, UNESCO announced that it would help Iraq completely restore the ancient city of Babylon. The reconstruction would be under the general supervision of Saddam Hussein. But in 1979, Saddam Hussein began to propagate the notion that he was a direct lineal descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, calling himself Nebuchadnezzar III. He had coins struck showing his likeness to the Babylonian king. Hussein sought to restore the entire city as a tourist attraction. And in 1982, he began rebuilding Nebuchadnezzar's palace directly over the site of the old one, using bricks glorifying himself as Nebuchadnezzar's heir. He reconstructed the ancient Colosseum. And this, you can see, is Saddam's presidential palace built right on top of the ruins of ancient Babylon. In 1998, it was reported that Saddam Hussein had hidden a large supply of nerve gas and biological weapons beneath the ruins of ancient Babylon. In the ensuing invasion of Iraq by the United States, US Marines used the palace as a barracks. Here you can see a Marine sitting on the steps of the ancient Colosseum rebuilt by Saddam Hussein. And here you can see the line of new bricks which stand atop the ancient foundations of the Wall of Babylon. This is a replica of the Ishtar Gate in Babylon, built in 2004. The Americans turned this ancient site into Camp Alpha, a military base causing major damage during their 18-month stay. After decades of conflict, Iraq declared victory against ISIS in 2017. And in July 2019, UNESCO finally agreed to list Babylon as a World Heritage Site. So now our weary but very happy traveller can make his way home with only one task left: to send the obligatory postcard. Tu velim et cum multum temporis ibi. In other words, having a great time, wish you were here. Thank you for listening, everybody.